Please note the meeting's being recorded. The title of this presentation is Maximize Contributions, Limit Distractions, and the Art of Working Effectively in a Consortium. And so I want to introduce my co-presenters. Jeff Weber is the service owner of Academic Technologies, and David Goodrum is the director of Academic Technologies. Jeff is from the University of Minnesota, and David is from Oregon State University. And as I think about this, it's really our reflections across our careers and working with consortiums, the many years of experience we have collectively in consortiums, communities of practice, constituencies, groups. And I'm sure we could each of you tell you stories where some's good, some's bad, some's ugly. But the fact is there's lessons and takeaways here we want to share with you to help make the consortium that is Unison even more successful. And if you're not a Unison member, I'm sure you can apply these as well to the consortiums and constituency groups that your institution belongs to. Next slide, please.
Oh, one sec.
And so what's a consortium? The first part of that definition is pretty obvious. It's an association. It's comprised of individuals, perhaps of companies, organizations, governments, and they come together to achieve a common activity. But I really, really like, in fact, I asked for this slide, I really like the Latin word that means partnership, and the second part of it, which means fate. So your partnership shapes your fate. I find that very interesting, and I think it's true. You win or you lose together in a consortium. You depend upon each other. And I think that's absolutely important. I remember when EDUCAUSE first came up with the core data service. And I remember, and I'm not going to go into the constituency group that I was a member of, thinking about what that would look like. And we only saw it from our own perspective, from the data we wanted to collect. So not only did the one constituency group need to come together to think about what that would be, but we needed to combine with other constituency groups to become even stronger and become the core data service that it is today. I've also been involved in ACUDA and the Big 10 AA. In fact, before they were known as the BTAA, they were the CIC. And I remember constituency groups or consortiums being a key to my own professional success. And I remember when I first took a job in higher education at the University of Wisconsin, and a mentor, a boss, someone I looked up to, Cathy Christoph, told me, Cathy, you need to get your head up. You need to get out there in the community. And I was really busy and I was like, no, I don't have time for that. And yet she really made me do that. And I'm not natural at that. I'm actually an introvert. And those consortium groups opened my eyes and gave me a diversity of thought and a way of looking at things, an exposure and a professional network that I value to this day. It continued at the Moore Association, but I go on. Next slide, please. One of the things I read about in preparing for this presentation, in fact, with the help of my colleague, Jeff Weber, who made some recommendations about what to read, is that in Bioscience Consulting, written by Scott Wagner, he talks about the need to stumble around in a coordinated fashion, the need to have assembled chaos, and how to transform what some people see, and I did initially when Cathy Christoph said it to me, as a disadvantage. They see being part of a consortium makes things take longer. It's certainly got a communication overhead. But you know what? Building relationships makes us all stronger. And you build relationships through communication, but not just through communication, but through building trust. And trust is the single most important ingredient to a successful collaboration. It's really not just a buzzword. And isn't the same as liking someone or agreeing with them. It's trusting them for action. So as you stumble around, you learn to trust the person that helps you pick yourself back up. And you learn that you don't have to know everything. It's okay to stumble. It humbles you to a certain extent, but it also gets that ego out of the way in the room. Trust creates mutual impact. And this type of trust comes through tough conversations. Through that, it finds common ground and it makes collaboration possible. It's alive, it's active, engaged. It looks awkward at times, and that's by design. Stumbling together lets us get to know one another. My father told me once that the hardest lesson he ever learned was that people want to be asked for help. And so sometimes you think when you meet people, or at least I did, that you need to present this confident, expert, all knowledgeable person. And the fact is, building partnership isn't necessarily about putting your best foot forward and always being, if perfect is a word, or trying to be perfect. We make friends by stumbling into each other and helping each other up. People want to be needed. They want to be involved. I take a look at the 3 task force, the strategic task force that are going on in Unison. And I think about all those task force, and each in their own way has stumbled, picked themselves back up, and is very close to a final product. And having 9 institutions in the room for the Engage e-reader replacement task force, or 7 institutions for each of the learning analytics task force, informs the conversations. Those task force force us to take risks. They force us to make mistakes together. They force us to stumble. And by that, we get opportunities for new and creative thinking and solutions. And the beauty is not everybody makes the same errors, and we learn not to make the same errors by watching each other. It's important. Next slide, please. So conflict is actually useful in a consortium. We shouldn't shy away from the tough discussions, the ways that we are different, the perspectives that may be in opposition to each other even. Human beings try not to offend. And the fact is, discussions become dominated by just 1 or 2 people when the rest of the room is trying to avoid that conflict. If we get more voices in the room, we find that middle ground, we find that 360 degrees of perspective, and we can bring it together, and we can use that conflict to make progress. Conflict is diversity at work, and you need to provoke it, and then you need to mold it and shape it. Molding, to me, is the art of listening actively to what is being said, making sure there's room for your reflective thinkers in the room. True opinions are often obscured when we have fear of conflict, and dissent is an absolute obligation in a consortium. It fuels creativity, but dissent respectively. Debate the topic, not the person. It's not personal. You're all trying to get to the same goal. You see different paths. That's entirely possible. Promoting productive debate with probing questions that can engage discussion works. It simply works. Multiple minds will consider more possibilities. It's actually the thought behind neural networks and AI. To lead, you have to embrace, address, and harness that conflict. It's kind of that no pain, no gain thing that we've all heard before. But sometimes when we're in a consortium or constituency group or whatever the name is, we think we're here to play nice. And we are ultimately here to achieve a goal, but it starts with dissent and it starts with conflict. Together, if we could move to the next slide, please. Together, we can absolutely do more. There's a richness in those perspectives. And by stumbling into each other, there's some fortuitous serendipity, another word I learned from Jeff's readings that I really liked. I'll put it this way, and this is not quite a constituency group, but I think it's very true. It's for I can't even say it, fortuitous serendipity that I got here. I was on a journey about a year ago looking for that next professional role, really the capstone of my career. And I found a couple. I found a couple CIO roles. I got a couple offers, but it wasn't what I was looking for. But I hadn't really clarified what I was looking for in my own mind. And I had talked to about 7 of my mentors that I've picked up across the years. And one of them looked at me after I turned down 2 good offers and said, "What are you really looking for?" And I said, "Well, I'm a teacher. I want to be part of the academic mission. I don't want to replace an ERP system. It's not what I live and breathe for, right?" I want to be part of the instructional mission and the research mission. And that was in February of 2020, the last month of normalcy, right? And because I answered it that way, because she put it to me that way, that mentor came back to me and told me about the opportunity at Unison, which I hadn't even considered. It was fortuitous serendipity. And it was because I had a group of mentors together that helped me think through a very difficult problem. As a consortium, we can do that, and we can do it together. You want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. The actual African proverb, as I read it today on the internet, so take it for what it's worth, alone a youth runs fast, but with an elder slow, together they'll go far. I think there's a lot of richness in the full proverb. Next slide, please.
Cool. And I'll take it over from here, Cathy. Thank you. I'm going to continue with the conversation about communication. And working with a consortium, it's all about communication. If you haven't developed an elevator speech yet about your work with a consortium, and then having some supplementary materials, you might want to do that, because I found it's a continual, there's continual opportunities to explain. Many people are new to working in consortiums and they don't understand. And by helping them do it without becoming exasperated, you kind of point them in the right direction so they understand better going forward. Think about it. You become the bond between the consortium work that you do and your home institution. From an input standpoint, we contribute from our home institution, our culture, our practices, our aspirations, our struggles, and then we take back from the consortium our ideas, concepts, possibilities, experiments, and opportunities that we want to share back and communicate with our colleagues back home. I'd like to ask the question on do we feel we can wear our consortial hat and still honor our home institution? And I think the answer is yes, but it takes a deliberate effort to do so. And a couple things that help in that matter. One is transparency on both sides. When you're with your consortial colleagues, being transparent about not only what's going well, but what you're struggling with, and what you really hope to do. That honesty with courage is really helpful as input into the process. And then being similarly transparent back at your home university. Being able to say to a colleague back home, you know, I said we would never touch this area. We've always done it. It's a deep tradition here that this is kind of off limits, but I'm learning over here that people are doing this successful. Can we at least take a look at that and make sure we're not missing something there? That's the kind of transparency with courage that can really make a difference. Secondly, I think there's another aspect to it, kind of a goodwill or greater good mentality. What I mean by that is that you're keenly aware of your institution's interests and needs, but you put on your consortial hat to work on what's high priority for the consortium at the time. Even though you're waiting for these other things to come up that you really want to work on, can you keep that hat on and move these things forward, knowing that when the stuff you're really passionate about comes up, others might have to put that greater good mindset on to help your stuff advance. I think you can honor both. You never let go of your home institution's needs, but you do have that greater good mindset. As Cathy kind of mentioned, there's a lot of communication involved with consortiums. Everything in a consortium involves dialogue. You're not able to really go into a meeting and say, here's what we're going to do without taking any questions. Everything's up for debate. Everything is a dialogue, and it takes time and effort. By understanding that it's part of the process, we can accept it more and not be so frustrated. The other thing that's really important to do is be aware of group dynamics. And sometimes, as Cathy mentioned, you might be misunderstood. Sometimes people might think that, well, who do they think they are? Kind of suggesting this counter group idea. But as we just heard from Cathy, it's part of that process. And similarly, when you're back at your home institution and you suggest something that people don't understand, you can be criticized, like, you want to do what? And why would we ever consider doing that? There are many examples, but the one that comes to mind right now is when we first considered implementing someone else's work. And I think of the Mila project developed out of Michigan, very solid project being implemented many different places. When we brought that back to Minnesota, the initial reaction was, well, why would we want to put in somebody else's work? Why would we want to use a platform we're not familiar with? Why would we want to do this? And why would we want to do that? And I think those questions involved communication on our side. And we ended up having to set the bar very, very low, which was, if we try, we succeed. The only way we fail is if we don't try. And even with that, some people had a hard time with it, but that conversation broke some things there. And so next time we have these types of conversations, we don't have to go there again. We've kind of broken through. Yeah, we do want to put other people's stuff in. Yeah, we can trust this and we will learn from it. But it had to start with a pretty intense conversation. To sum up this, I have a mentor who uses this phrase a lot: embrace the awkward. I think when you're talking about new ideas, pushing boundaries and things like that, it can be awkward. But just as Cathy referred to, when you go through that awkwardness, you deepen your relations such that you can really work well together as you go forward. And lastly, with this communication section that I'll go on, many people don't understand that Unison is not a vendor and we are the customers. People say, well, just have Unison do it, Jeff. We're their customers. And there's another opportunity there to say, no, we work together. We are Unison. We work together to solve these issues. Silence is not inattention. Apathy is. Silence, oftentimes, as Cathy mentioned too, people are processing things. They might be silent, but the next thing out of their mouth might be brilliant. Our real enemy here is apathy. Apathy is defined where someone doesn't have the energy or will to make a contribution, even though it's important. And we, as consortial members, we want to, consider several things. I think there's also a concept I want to bring up called free riding. And there's research that says people gauge their contribution in consortiums based on how they perceive others will contribute. So if I believe that the Ohio State University is going to lead on this one, with several other universities going to be heavy participants, I can kind of free ride on that initiative. And I think that's one way to do it, but I think a better way to do it is have those dialogues about where am I uniquely qualified to lead? Where am I uniquely qualified, or where is it pressing or critical that I participate? And where do I just not have the time and I need to trail on that? Those types of decisions, I think, are more things that we can get around on a consortial basis for why I should contribute and how I should do it. I'd also like to share that I went through a mental shift as I started working with the consortium. And that was, I used to catch myself saying, I have to do my Unison work. I need to do my Unison work. I have to do my Unison work. And I gradually shifted that to, I get to do my Unison work, I get to do my Unison work, I get to do my Unison work. What I find is when I do work for Unison, I can temporarily leave the constrictions and boundaries that are set in my home institution to collaborate in that more freeing environment where nothing is easy, but I'm able to express thoughts without those boundaries and carry things back. And I've tried to make it stick a little bit by committing to myself that whatever I learned the week before in Unison, I try to apply it or share it with somebody the next week so it sticks more. So oftentimes in my staff strategic meeting on Monday, we'll cover what I learned in Unison the week before. And it's been a good practice for me to make things work better. Next topic, we do entrust problem solving to a diverse group at Unison. When I first started working with it, I had another fear. I was like, how's this going to work? I said, we're all going to use the same software. We're going to build a data platform together. We're going to collaborate on processes. Aren't we just going to be like 13 clones of each other at the end? And I quickly learned that there's no way that's going to happen. There's so much diversity at our different institutions or whatever. We may do something similar, but we're never going to be clones. And realizing that was very comforting to me, and that's something I had to get over. As I look across our subcommittees, I see diversity. Sharing from our application developer group, we purposely defined that as we just didn't want people who code, but we wanted the analysts, the leaders, we wanted the consumers of it, the the data scientists, the researchers to come in if they wanted to talk about things. So we got a diverse set of people looking at what we're working on a monthly basis. Similarly, if you look across Unison, there's diversity in the other committees. So as ideas advance through, we get a lot of diverse perspective there. The other thing is that I look at the people within Unison as having some of the things that I have accountable to me. I've not found an exact clone to me or a match to me, but by talking to people who have bits and pieces of accountabilities that I have, I'm able to learn from that and expands my mind, as well as hopefully I'm able to contribute back to them to help expand their thinking. This slide contains the word trust. I think it's important that we trust these issues to be solved by a diverse group. Once we realize we can't control it anyway, and we work to shape, it becomes very, very liberating. And next, I want to just talk about structure real briefly. Structure is important for people. If we start out our meetings with, hey, what do we want to do? It's too broad. People can't find themselves in that, and it can actually lend to some defensive behavior. If we provide a straw draft proposal for people to find themselves in and maybe expand if they don't see themselves in there, it's a much better starting place. And then a little bit about structure too. Recollections aren't as good as things that are written down. So even a cursory set of accurate notes are better than those fuzzy recollections over time. So I encourage you to provide that. And lastly, for my part, it's easy to identify Unison work as occurring within our consortial meetings and also our work back home. But when Unison members travel to EDUCAUSE or to IMS Global meeting to talk about standards, or the R1 peers group, or a vendor demo, what happens there is that I've noticed that Unison members kind of attract, they know that we're aware of each other's presence, and the disciplines that we learn in the consortial work, we're able to apply to those other meetings and actually have an impact outside of what we normally think of as consortial work. We're able to kind of plant that Unison flag with our ideas of data ownership, of collaboration, of working to standards and things like that. So I think our definition sometimes is too narrow about our reach. And with that, I'd like to turn over to David with the next slide.
Thanks, Jeff. Happy Wednesday to everyone. You've made it through half the week. You know, consortiums can be really good when what you're trying to solve is really big. And I don't know if you've noticed, but Unison projects are ambitious and complex. In fact, I'd be interested to see you type into the chat Unison projects that you think have been particularly ambitious or particularly complex. I'll give folks just a minute to type in the chat. This icon here, this graphic actually shows kind of the two halves of my mind, right? The part that's ambitious, the part that's complex. This may be my next or my first tattoo, if I ever get one. But obviously the UDP, the common data model, and even the work, all the work on the content, the contracts with publishers, yes, the influence to the vendors, particularly our partner in Structure, and some recent work that Oregon State has helped drive is on data marts, providing much more consumable and focused channels of data from the UDP. And so the consortium can be a good opportunity for this, because if you tried to do this all yourself, it would take a lot longer, and you'd probably end up going to a vendor and trying to buy something and those types of things. And here we're protecting the interest of the academy, of the institutions. Next slide. Of course, one of the downdrafts, sort of, is that, well, sometimes the pace of consortial progress is uneven. It's a hurry up and wait. You're trying to accomplish something so big, it takes longer. You learn the scope, the way you go. And we could probably all name examples of things that took longer than we thought they would. Or in the case with the data marts, the progress has been made in a very short period of time since December. And Unizin's now up to 5 or 6 data marts with more on the way, and already working with other institutions on adapting those or seeing how valuable they are to the individual institutions. Next slide. Well, one of the things you'll notice, and this I think tips on the themes that both Jeff and Cathy have mentioned, is that Unison is a different priority for different members, or aspects of Unison is a different priority for different members. You know, the classic iron triangle from project management is that the quality of work is constrained by time, resources or cost, and scope. You're lucky if you can control one. You're blessed if you can control 2 of them. It's impossible to control all 3. Well, for a consortium, in my opinion, it's built on commitment that's constrained by a social iron triangle of shared values, shared vision, and shared goals and tasks. And you really need to work on all 3. So with members, starting with teaching and learning subcommittees, through task forces, and up through the board, how can you take the time for the people to come to understand each other's values, visions, and goals? And, you know, that path from switching from Unison is this other work to Unison is my work is that the consortium helps me do my day job. For example, I don't have to deal with all the vendors individually because collectively we're impacting on them. And that's just one example. Next slide. So we've talked about the range of contribution, the range of participation, the importance of diversity across both of those. And it really does take the insights of everyone at every level to maybe find the secret sauce. So what kind of leadership is needed to bring this about? We often think that, okay, I'm a director, I'll tell people what to do. I'm the chair, I'll set the agenda. But really what you need more in this kind of consortial approach is the ability to convene, to connect, to communicate, and to coordinate around a shared purpose. It's a different kind of leadership that's needed within. You know, will it be the fresh pair of eyes, or will it be the wizened sage who will capture the kernel of the solution needed? Will it come from the person who finds out what they think when they talk? I'm a little bit like that. Or the person who needs to reflect before talking? Will it be the wild brainstorm, or will it be the systematic analysis? You won't know until you hear from all kinds. And how do you then get people to step forward and contribute and participate so that you can get this range of perspectives? Next slide. So you've heard a range of themes of maybe what it takes to run a consortium or foster community action, which is really what we're about. We're not just about getting together and sharing and having a glass of wine. It's really doing things together. So how do you foster community action? And these 6 came out of a different group that some of you have been involved in called Shaping EDU. Samantha Becker does a great job in enabling and fostering that group. And so I think this link this URL is still active. I forgot to double check, but they were providing a space for the community to come together to talk about what is needed to foster community action. And these will be in the slides, and I'll leave it here more as a resource. But you just look at those titles, and you can see really a reflection of the themes that Jeff and Cathy and I have come from, either our experience in Unison, our experience at our institutions, from reading that we've done. But there's really common connections on this approach to fostering community action. Diversity and inclusivity, engagement and collaboration, experience and the value add, and understanding the mechanisms for participants to both give and get, the kind of leadership that's needed, the shared values and purpose, which I mentioned, and the need for some structure and process, so it's not just a blank slate every time, every meeting. Now I'll hand it back to Cathy.
So I want to make sure we understand that when we involve ourselves in a consortium, we need to make an investment of ourselves. You need to invest your time, your attention, your energy, your involvement, your courage, your communication skills. And collective consortiums only work when they serve both the shared interests of the consortium and the self-interest of individual members. You don't sacrifice your individuality, you bring it to the diversity. The background behind me is a quilt. It's a perfect example. You bring the richness of the different fabrics together to create something completely different. So those interests need to be known, both the self-interested portions of them, the ones that are dedicated to your institution and your goals, as well as molding them into something that is a collective interest, that is the total of the quilt, if you will. Don't wait until you don't like a collective decision right before it's almost done and then say, that doesn't work. Speak up, be brave. If you want to get your feet wet, and I did it this way because I am really an introvert, I'm telling you, I looked for a role I could fill. And consortium groups, like our teaching and learning groups within Unison, need different roles. They need facilitators, they need note takers, they need chairs. If you're not quite ready to get into the milieu, consider being the note taker or consider being the timekeeper. Move yourself into a more comfortable level and maybe become the facilitator and someone who actively contributes. You got to lead from where you are. And I'll give the example of something I watched in the app dev group just a month ago. So if there's any app devers out there, put your thumb up or something. But there was a young lady, at least from my perspective, a young lady, and I don't remember her name. I didn't get it, flip my Zoom fast enough to tell. And we were stuck, or the app dev group was discussing, we really don't have a common architecture. We use different technology stacks. And at a certain point she got in and she said, that's okay. We could have two. And, it's painfully obvious, but she had the guts to say it. And that was important. And it moved the group forward. Lead from where you are. She did that. We can all do that. And rather than trying to think of yourself as a leader to try to get people to follow you, we don't need clones of ourselves. We need to encourage others to co-create, to create that fortuitous serendipity, to stumble along together, to use the power of collaboration to achieve the consortium's common goals, to find the consortium's common goals in some cases. Only a good innovation leader can foster a culture that is creative, that is innovative, and that collaborates. It takes the collective efforts and it gets positive results. And we need all of you to be actively engaged with that. So if we go to the next slide, what I've put here are 3 of the challenges I see for Unison. And the first one, and I thank Jeff and David for referring to this, is how do we wear our Unison hat when we're not at Unison? How do we explain Unison on our campuses? Unison has a ton to offer to a wide variety of constituencies. And You may not in your day job, if you will, necessarily interact with faculty, staff, students, advisors, institutional research, academic research, and whoever else I've missed. But your Unison consortium provides value to all of those groups. So communicating with the people who do, or those people, can be important. The second challenge that I'll just put out there for us to think about, and you can shape your questions around that, we'll open for questions here shortly, is how do we foster awareness? Not only does Unison have a lot of things to offer, but there's a lot of things, back of the kitchen being cooked up right now. And the fact is, we need to help you, and I want suggestions on how Unison can help you communicate to those constituencies, give you the building blocks for those communications, and help you get those conversations started, because it starts with awareness, and then it moves to onboarding and adoption. And last but not least, and something that is difficult in instruction, and I know this from many, many years of teaching across actually every grade level to graduate school, it's hard to measure its impact. But if we don't set out to figure out a way to do that, you're right, it will be impossible to measure impact. And we can't, from sitting at Unison, if you will, we can't measure the impact. We can assist, and you need to help us with that, but the actual measurements are probably going to be best bubbled up from our consortium members. And so with that, if we can go to the next slide, I'll encourage all of you to know that you can unmute your mics, or you can throw it in the chat, and we welcome questions. All about engagement here, folks.
Cathy, may I butt in?
Sure, please butt in. I'm inviting butting.
There are faces here, obviously, that I recognize, and names that have worked pretty hard on our teaching and learning advisory group. But I'm wondering how many folks here are completely new to Unison. Which of the people here are new? Would you mind revealing yourself? I could call people out. I could.
Let's see.
Lauren and Christy and Jeff, can you tell me, are some of these names new, or is everybody already pretty engaged? You're much more engaged in the subcommittees than I am.
I recognize most of the names, and it's probably just because I'm new if you are engaged in one of the teaching and learning groups. I don't know Kate, and I don't think I know Angela.
And of course, I'm always excited to see another Maggie, just anytime. Just aren't that many.
In fairness, we are the last session of the day, and we are before the spatial chat. So please, if we could just keep in mind, I really do want your feedback. You saw my email up there shortly. I'm sure you can find me at Unison. I really do want your feedback on how we can best empower you to represent us, to be part of the consortium when you're back at your institution, how we can best make sure that the value of Unison is clearly communicated and creates awareness on the campus so we get the most out of that value. And last but not least, we need to measure impact. So I'll implore you to do that, and I'll ask for questions one last time if we have any. I want to thank all of you. I want to thank everybody who co-presented with me, Jeff and David. Really appreciate it. Hope to see you at Spatial Chat. That is purely a relaxing time. And no questions, no answers, no presentations. Just grab your avatar, move it around the screen, and have a good time. Thank you all.
Thanks all.
Take care.